Okay. Hi. First I want to say I'm a huge history buff. I love history. I've loved it for years. I read almost nothing but history. I don't read novels. I read historical books, biographies, things like that. And when I was in my 20s, I stumbled upon a book called The Historical Jesus. And I never really thought about Jesus as an historical figure. I grew up in a Catholic household, so I know about Jesus, the religious figure, but I never really thought about, Jesus, the man, the real person, or anything about it. And the book fascinated me, and I started buying more and more books, and I started doing more and more research, and I attended lectures by university professors about the historical Jesus. It's a whole scholarly field about the real man, Jesus. And I found it fascinating. This afternoon, I actually sat down in my lounge and counted out all my books on just the historical Jesus. I have 73 books just on that one subject. So I'm a fanatic about this, and I'm not even religious, I'm an atheist. But it just fascinates me that probably the most well-known person in the world, nobody really knows anything about other than, the religious aspects. And so saying that, I want to have a couple of disclaimers. I'm going to try to avoid talking about religion. This is not a religious topic, as Tim said. If I offend anyone, I apologize. If you're a right-wing Christian, you may want to leave the room temporarily. But I don't want to be controversial here. I'm just going to look at it from a historical perspective, just as historians do and scholars do, and leave it at that, and try to avoid anything else, any controversial issues. Okay, so did Jesus really exist? Was there a real person, who walked, who dreamt, who saw the moon, who breathed, who ate, who, coughed, sneezed? Did he really exist? And the answer is yes, he did. There was a real person, Jesus, that actually walked on the earth, that could look up and see the stars at night, that could, feel the sun on his face. And so scholars have studied what can we learn about him? What do we know about him? Just from a historical perspective. How do we know about the real Jesus? So we have multiple ways we know about him. Obviously the four Gospels in the New Testament. We also have the letters of Paul in the New Testament, which is totally separate from the four Gospels. There are Gospels not in the Bible. We have bits and pieces of 40 different Gospels that aren't in the Bible, which, again, is a fascinating thing. People think we just have 4 and that's it. No, we have over 40 of them. A lot of bits and pieces, but some we have whole books on Gospels that didn't make it into the Bible. And there's some of them fascinating. Some of them are just fantastical. Like there's one that has Jesus as a little boy. And he plays with another little boy, gets mad at him, and zaps him dead, and then he brings him back to life. And that's called the Infancy Gospel of Thomas. And it's really amazing. Also, Jesus is mentioned in letters and books by Christians. They talk about him in various letters, and there are books written about Jesus. He's also mentioned in letters and books for Romans that are non-Christians. So there are, who have no religious aspect to it at all. They just talk about the real person. And then finally, the historian Josephus, who I haven't read because he's probably one of the most important sources. Josephus was born right around the time Jesus died, and he wrote 2 major volumes, Jewish Wars, which was 8 volumes, and Antiquities of the Jews, a 20-volume, huge collection about the whole history of the Jewish population from the earliest time right up until when he was writing. And Jesus is mentioned in that second one. He's mentioned one paragraph in volume 18 and one brief line in number 20, which again I find fascinating. The most popular, not most popular, most well-known individual in the world, and yet in this huge 20-volume collection he's only mentioned in one paragraph, which means he was famous enough during that time period, shortly after his death, to be written about at all. A lot of people didn't get written about at all, but he at least got a paragraph and another line. But he wasn't so well known then that he got a whole volume dedicated just to him. So again, I find that fascinating. So he was well known, but not too well known back then. And according to Josephus, I'm not going to read out the whole paragraph, but basically he was a wise man, did startling deeds, he was a teacher, and Pilate condemned him to death, to the cross. And that's the gist of that one paragraph of what Josephus has to say. And again, this is someone who's not a Christian, who had nothing to do with religion. He was Jewish, but he was writing for the Romans, and that's what he had to say about Jesus. And this is like about 30 years after Jesus died. So within the lifetime, people are still living who knew Jesus. His family and friends were still living at this time when Josephus wrote this. So what do we know about Jesus? He died during the era of Pontius Pilate. between the years 26 and 36. So if anyone asks you, when did the real Jesus die, you can say between 26 and 36. We don't know exactly. Most scholars tend to think around the year 30, but we don't know exactly. But we do know Pontius Pilate definitely exists. I was in Israel, me and my husband, last year, and this is a stone saying Pontius Pilate, prefect of Judea. And this is from that time, when he was right after his reign, between the years 26 and 36. So I think this stone is from like 35, 36. So it's really cool to get my picture right next to it. We're in Israel. We know he was a Jewish teacher. This is an old synagogue, the ruins of an old synagogue from the time of Jesus. And if you can kind of see in the background there, that's the Sea of Galilee there. This was a synagogue right on the Sea of Galilee from the time of Jesus. Most likely Jesus did speak at this synagogue. Again, it's a guess, but he spoke at most synagogues around the Sea of Galilee, and this is the ruins of one of them, so he probably spoke there. He had many followers, both Jewish and Greek Roman. This is, they call this the House of St. Peter here. We don't know if it's actually the House of St. Peter, but it was founded in Capernaum. Capernaum was a small fishing village on the Sea of Galilee. And above here is just a new church they built on top of the ruins to try to protect it, so they have a religious place on top of the ruins. But down here was a house in Capernaum, and there's graffiti there from just about 40 or 50 years after Jesus died. There's crosses, there's Blessed St. Peter, and all this graffiti scrawled under the wall from not too long after Jesus died, and a lot to St. Peter. So they tend to think this could be possibly St. Peter's house. Again, nobody knows for sure, although we know Peter came from Capernaum. So even if this wasn't his house, it was certainly in this area, which is kind of cool. He was intelligent. We know he had taught all these parables, original parables that were very confusing at the time, but that obviously came from someone who was who could think very clearly, come up with clever ways to say things. This is a boat they call the Jesus boat. Again, it's probably not the boat Jesus ever was in, but it's from his time period, and this is the type of boat that was in the Sea of Galilee that fishermen used, and that Jesus would use a type of boat like this. It was amazing they found those ruins. It was preserved under the mud, and it just came upon it during a drought at one point. We know he's from the town of Nazareth. Again, this is the Sea of Galilee. Nazareth is located right over here. It's about, from the Sea of Galilee, I think it took us, 35, 40-minute drive from the Sea of Galilee. So not too far over the ridge there is Nazareth, where Jesus is from. He had a brother, James. We know that for certain. James was an early leader of the church, along with Peter. Peter gets written and talked about a lot, but actually James, historians think James is actually as important, if not more important, than Peter during that initial time after Jesus died. And this is ossuary. It made headlines about 10 years ago because it says on here, you can't read it, but it says, James, brother of Jesus. It probably wasn't the James, brother of that Jesus, because James and Jesus were both popular names back then. But anyway, it got a lot of people talking about it because they found this box, and people say, well, it could be the James, the brother of Jesus. We don't know for sure. He was crucified. Everybody knows that. There's all historical documents in and out of the Gospels saying he was crucified, murdered under Pontius Pilate. This is a model of Jerusalem at the time of Jesus. There's the temple, and so Jerusalem was about this size. I mean, it was a model, but I mean, it wasn't a huge city, even though it was a popular city and all these pilgrims came to it. It wasn't that big, and Jesus was crucified and buried outside of the walls. These are the representation of the old walls of Jerusalem. He had followers who continued to talk about him after he died. After he died, his followers stayed in Jerusalem, but they also went all the way around the Sea of Galilee. By the way, the Sea of Galilee is actually a lake. Only in English is it called sea. All the other languages, it's Lake Galilee, Galilee Lake. But for some reason in English it translates as Sea of Galilee. Don't know why. But anyway, so that's that there. And he spoke Aramaic. Everyone thinks Jesus spoke English. A lot of people do. No, he spoke Aramaic. This is script in Aramaic. All the Gospels are written in Greek. But there's certain words and phrases that they think went back to the original Jesus because they're in the original Aramaic. And if you go to the Gospel and read it, you can see, all of a sudden it says in Aramaic, it'll say this, and then it translates it into Greek. So we think those words actually went back to the real Jesus. But Jesus probably didn't speak Greek, didn't speak Latin, definitely didn't speak English, didn't exist then. But the everyday language of people back at his time was Aramaic. So he taught in Aramaic, his phrases were Aramaic, his jokes were in Aramaic. There's one line, to be honest, I don't remember off the top of my head. It's a line in the Greek Gospel, and when you translate it back into Aramaic, it's actually a kind of a play on words that you don't get in the Greek. So again, scholars have done this. They've taken the whole Greek Gospel, translated it back to Aramaic, and they suddenly found these word plays and things like that in the original Aramaic, which you don't get in the Greek, which again makes them think that it went back to the historical Jesus. His real name is actually Yeshu. The Greek translation of the name is Jesus. So if you came upon Jesus, he yelled, "Hey Jesus," you wouldn't turn around. You'd have to say, "Yeshu," and then he'd turn around. So when people talking about Jesus, really they should be saying Yeshu of Nazareth, which was how he was known, really. I just find him a fascinating figure, that the fact that he is so well known and yet nobody really knows anything about him. And again, just from a historical perspective, there was so much information there about him. I've just kind of skimmed the surface of it, but I definitely recommend getting a book. If you just Google or go to Amazon or just Google historical Jesus. Like I said, I have 73 books, and there's a lot more than that out there. The particular scholar I can recommend, his name is Bart Ehrman. And I have 13 of his books, so 13 of my 73 are from Bart. And this Professor Ehrman accompanied me and my husband and a whole group on a tour of Israel last year, and he's just fascinating. He gave lectures all the way through. A fascinating man. He's able to he reads Greek and Latin fluently, and he translates the Gospels himself. And it's just amazing that all the things he can tell us that you don't normally get just researching it yourself. So anyway, that's basically my talk. I'm just fascinated. I keep wanting to research more and more. The more I find out about the real Jesus, the more I want to learn. So thank you very much.